The ship was called Patience. Dessa Morvain had always hated that name. She sat at the head of the briefing table and held her coffee mug with both hands. The mug was old. The handle was chipped. It had a picture of a mountain on it that she could not remember buying. She held it the way some people hold a railing when they are standing near a great height. The ensign standing at the front of the room was 23 years old. His name was Rook. He had good posture and a quiet voice, and he had been reading from the report for 11 minutes. Dessa had not looked at him once. She looked at the table, at the mug, at the scratch in the table's surface near her left elbow that she had noticed the first time she sat in this room 7 years ago. Rook kept reading. The report had come in 3 days ago. Someone had labeled it Priority Amber, which was the second highest flag in the system. Dessa had not asked why it was not Priority Red. She already knew. The person who filed it had looked at the numbers and gone somewhere quiet for a while, before they could make themselves type anything at all. Rook's voice did not shake. Dessa noticed that. She thought it was probably costing him. Kepler Colony, Outer Ring, population 41,000, a working colony, miners, farmers, a small medical center, 2 schools. The kind of place people moved to when they wanted a quiet life and were not afraid of distance. The kind of place children grew up knowing every neighbor's name. The Velhari Dominion's ships had arrived without warning. No signal, no demand, no declaration of any kind. They came in from the dark side of the moon the colony sat nearest to, and they had done what they came to do, and then they had left. They had hit the schools first. Rook kept reading. The words were clean and official and terrible. Dessa listened to all of them. She did not close her eyes. She did not put the mug down. The medical center. The underground shelters. The ones the colonists had dug themselves, over 3 weekends, with their own equipment, because they had children and they were careful people who believed in being ready for the worst. Those shelters had been targeted with a kind of precision that only comes from planning. Someone had studied the colony's layout. Someone had mapped the places people would run to. Rook reached the end of a page. He turned it over. The casualty number sat in the middle of the next paragraph, like a stone in still water. He read it aloud. The room did not make a sound. There were 6 people at the table besides Dessa. Senior officers, people who had seen bad things in their careers, people who had, between them, lived through 4 separate armed conflicts and a dozen smaller fires. They sat with the number and did not look at each other. Dessa said, He turned slightly toward her, the way a person does when they are expecting more. A question maybe, an order, an expression of something, anything. There was nothing more. Dessa set her thumb against the chip in the mug handle. It fit her thumb the way it always had. Rook looked back at his report. He cleared his throat once, quietly, and continued. There was a section about the Velhari's likely rationale. Intelligence had pulled it together fast, faster than usual, which meant someone at the top had made a call at 2 in the morning, and a lot of people had not slept since. The conclusion was clean and ugly. The Velhari were a species of long thinking. They planned in decades. They did not act without calculation. And their calculation, intelligence believed, had been this. Human children are future soldiers. A colony of 41,000 produces a military generation inside 20 years. Remove the generation at the source. That was the word used in the report. Efficient. One of the officers at the table, Commander Vassi, a broad, quiet man who had 3 kids of his own back on Earth Station, pushed back from the table slightly. Not to leave, just to get air. Dessa watched him do it from the corner of her eye, and said nothing. Rook finished the report. He lowered the pages. He looked at the Admiral. The room was very still. Dessa set the mug down on the table. Her hands stayed around it for a moment, fingers loose. Then she folded them together and looked up at the display screen on the far wall, which showed the star map of the outer ring. Kepler colony was a small dot, green, still marked green in the system because no one had updated it yet. She studied the map. She looked at the cluster of systems 3 sectors over that belonged to the Velhari Dominion. Their worlds, their space, 14 systems, some industrial, some military, some used for other things. "Do we know where their breeding worlds are?" she said. The question came out the same way she would ask where the commissary had moved to, or what time the next briefing was scheduled. Vassi stopped moving. Everyone at the table stopped. Rook, still standing at the front of the room, opened his mouth and then closed it. He had a feeling, young as he was, green as he was, that whatever he said next would be something he remembered for the rest of his life. He chose carefully. "We have coordinates on 2 confirmed ones, Admiral. The 3rd is estimated." Dessa nodded once. "Pull them up." Someone pulled them up. The map shifted. 3 systems highlighted. She looked at them for a long time. No one spoke. The recycled air of the briefing room moved quietly through the vents. Somewhere far down the corridor, someone was running, boots on metal, quick and ordinary, a crew member on an errand that had nothing to do with any of this. Dessa looked at the green dot that was Kepler colony. She looked at the 3 highlighted systems. She picked the mug back up. "Dismissed," she said. "Rook, leave the report." People stood. People left. Vassi was the last one out. He paused at the door for a moment. And Dessa felt him pause, and she did not turn around. And after a moment he left too. The door closed. The briefing room was empty. The map was still on the screen. Kepler colony still green. The 3 Velhari systems still highlighted, waiting. Dessa sat alone and held her mug and looked at the map and did not feel anything that had a name she was willing to use. There was a scratch near her left elbow. She had noticed it 7 years ago. She put her finger on it now, just to feel it. Still there. She stood up. She buttoned her jacket. She took the report from the table. She walked to the door. She left the mug behind on the table. That was new. She had never done that before. Ambassador Kelvor had not slept in 30 hours. This was not unusual for him during a crisis. He was old, 340 cycles, which translated to something past 200 years in human reckoning, and his body had learned, over a very long life, how to run on very little. What was unusual was why he was not sleeping. He had stopped sleeping not because he was busy. He had stopped because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the human fleet on his tactical display, and the way it was moving, and the shape it was making. He was trying to understand the shape. His quarters aboard the Conclave orbital station were tidy and dim. The Thune Collective preferred lower light. He had a wide desk covered in reports, a narrow window that looked out at the stars, and a small table with 2 chairs where he sometimes had tea with people he was trying to understand. He was at the window now, not looking at the stars. Looking at the fleet. The Velhari Dominion had released their public statement 6 hours after the news from Kepler colony broke across the galactic networks. 47 pages. Kelvor had read all of them, twice, because that was his job, and because he was the kind of person who believed that understanding a thing, even an ugly thing, was better than not understanding it. The statement was, technically, very well made. It laid out the Velhari strategic doctrine, the long thinking, the generational math, the calculated removal of future military capacity. It quoted 17 different historical precedents for preemptive action in contested space. It argued, with some force, that the colony had been established in a zone the Velhari considered a buffer region, and that humanity had been warned, informally, through back channels, that expansion there would be met with resistance. There was a word in the statement for what the Velhari had done. Kelvor had read the word. He had put the report down. He had stood at the window for a while, looking at nothing. The word was necessary. He had been a diplomat for 200 years. He had heard that word used to cover a great many things. He was not naive about the work of politics and war. But something about reading that word, necessary, in the context of 2 schools and an underground shelter full of people who had dug it with their own hands, sat in him like a cold stone that would not move. The Velhari expected the galaxy to read that statement and see a case, a legal framework, a defensible position. Kelvor looked at the human fleet on his screen and thought, they have not read the same room I have. Humanity's formal response arrived 4 days later. It came through the proper conclave channels, addressed correctly, filed on time, formatted without error. It was, in every procedural sense, a model response. Kelvor had opened it, expecting length. Humans, in his experience, wrote long when they were angry. They put the feeling into the words. They piled up sentences the way they piled up everything else. Fast, slightly chaotic, more than you ask for. The response was 4 sentences. He read it once. He read it again. He set it on the desk and walked to the window. The first sentence stated that the attack on Kepler Colony had been confirmed as a deliberate and targeted strike against civilian infrastructure, including educational and medical facilities. The second sentence stated that the human government considered this an act that existed outside the bounds of any recognized framework of warfare, negotiation, or acceptable political action. The third sentence gave a deadline, 72 standard hours. Within that time, the Velhari Dominion was asked to present its government to a conclave tribunal. Just come and stand in front of the people you answer to, now. The fourth sentence was a number. The number was the size of the human fleet currently moving toward Velhari space. Not a threat, not a declaration, just a number. A fact sitting at the end of 3 careful sentences, the way you might set a very large object down on a table, without making a sound. Kelvor looked at the fleet on his screen, and then looked at the number in the response, and they matched. His secondary heart did something it had never done before. It was not pain exactly. It was more like recognition of something he did not want to recognize. He sent messages to 14 other ambassadors that evening. He wanted to know if they were reading this the way he was. The replies came back fast, faster than usual, which told him people had been watching and waiting, and were perhaps relieved someone had said something first. The Preth and the Ocean, who had been in open conflict with each other for 60 years, had both moved their diplomatic liaisons to Conclave Station in the last 24 hours. They had not shared the same orbital in living memory. They were both here now. Kelvor found that detail difficult to sit with. A Velhari minister appeared on the Galactic Broadcast Network the following morning. She was calm and well-presented and very certain of herself, which Kelvor recognized as the kind of certainty that comes from not yet understanding what is happening to you. Humans are a young species, she said, in the smooth, measured tone of someone who has said difficult things in public before. They will feel this deeply, they will need time, but in the end, they will negotiate. They always negotiate. Grief exhausts itself. It is the nature of grief. The broadcast ran on 17 networks. Kelvor watched it in his quarters, with the lights lower than usual. He thought about what he knew about Dessa Morvain. Fleet Admiral, 52 years old, 3 decades of service. A reputation for being difficult to read and impossible to move once she had made a decision. A daughter she never spoke about. A notation in her file, 14 years old, the notation, that Kelvor had always been too careful to ask about. He thought about the mug in the briefing room footage, in the grainy clip someone had leaked to the networks. Dessa holding it, not putting it down. He thought, the minister is wrong. She is using the wrong model. She is thinking about grief, as if it is a storm. Something that comes in hard, and burns itself out, and leaves wreckage behind. And then there is quiet. And in the quiet, people come back to the table. Kelvor had known humans for 61 years. He had eaten their food, and watched their strange films, and sat with them when they cried, and could not explain why. He was perhaps one of 3 people in the galaxy who had any real claim to understanding them. He understood them well enough to know this was not a storm. This was a decision already made, and now being carried out. There was no weather in it. There was no feeling visible on the surface, because the feeling had already gone somewhere deep and structural and load-bearing, the way a foundation is not the part of a building you see. He pulled up the personnel file, found the notation. The daughter's name was Yara. He closed the file. He poured himself a glass of the grain liquor Dessa had given him 8 years ago, when they had reached a small agreement on border trade, and which he had kept ever since, and never opened until now. He drank. He looked at the fleet on the screen, 14 systems away, moving like something that had already made up its mind. "This is not how species behave," he said to the empty room. He was not sure if he meant the Velhari. He was not sure if he meant the humans. He stood at the window for a long time, and the stars did not move, and the fleet kept moving, and somewhere in the dark 3 sectors over, 72 hours were running out. The conclave chamber was the largest room on the station. It was built to hold 17 delegations, each at their own curved desk, arranged in a wide circle around the central floor. The ceiling was high, and the lighting was neutral, designed at great expense to be inoffensive to every known species' visual range. The result was that the room had no particular character at all. It was the color of a decision made by a committee. Kelvor sat at the Thune Collective's desk and watched people arrive. The Velhari delegation came in as a group, 7 of them, in the long formal coats their government reserved for proceedings of consequence. Their lead delegate was a woman named Iris, tall, composed, the kind of calm that comes from having won difficult rooms before. She moved to her desk with the ease of someone who had prepared thoroughly and knew it, and she arranged her materials with precise, unhurried hands. She was, Kelvor thought, about to have the worst day of her career. He watched the gallery seats. The gallery was for observers, non-voting parties, press, military liaisons. It was usually half empty. Today it was full. Kelvor had not expected the gallery to be full. He had not quite predicted this specific detail, and it unsettled him in ways he could not immediately name. Species that had not sent a delegate to an emergency session in decades were seated in the gallery now, still and attentive. The Preth and the Oshan were there, 4 seats apart. Dessa Morvain was in the 3rd row. She was not in uniform. She wore a plain dark jacket and had her hair pulled back the way she always did, and she was looking down at a datapad in her lap, with the focused expression of someone solving a problem that had nothing to do with where she was. She was doing a crossword puzzle, in ink. Kelvor watched her for a moment. He had known her long enough to know that she only used ink when she was completely certain of her answers in advance. She did not like to erase. She did not like to be wrong on paper. He looked away. The session opened on schedule. The conclave chair, an elderly Marin named Sel, who had been running these sessions for 40 years and had the posture of someone who had survived worse than this, called the room to order and stated the single item on the agenda. The motion: formal withdrawal of Galactic Conclave protection from the Velhari Dominion. Release of all member species from non-interference obligations regarding Velhari space. Effective immediately upon passing. Iris stood. She spoke for 2 hours. Kelvor listened to all of it. He owed her that much. She was good. She was genuinely good. The argument was airtight in the places where arguments can be airtight. And in the places where it had weak points, she moved through them fast and covered them with historical weight. She cited precedents. She cited the informal boundary warnings that had been issued through back channels years ago. She argued that the conclave was being asked to punish a civilization for acting on legitimate strategic concern, and that setting this precedent would destabilize every territorial negotiation in the Outer Ring for the next century. She was right about some of it. Kelvor looked at the gallery. Dessa had filled in several rows of the crossword. She did not look up at any point during Iris's speech. Not once. Something about that, the total absence of performance, the complete lack of any need to appear to be listening, was more disturbing to Kelvor than the size of the fleet he had been watching on his screen for 5 days. Anger watches. Anger pays attention because it wants to find the weak spot. Anger wants to rebut. Whatever Dessa had brought into this chamber was not watching Iris. It had already moved past Iris. It was somewhere further down a road that had been decided before anyone set foot in this room. The Preth delegate in the gallery was watching Dessa. The Ashan delegate was watching Dessa. Half the gallery was watching Dessa do a crossword puzzle in ink. Iris finished. She sat. She folded her hands on the desk in front of her with great composure, and she waited. Cell opened the floor to responses. 3 delegations spoke. Short, careful, diplomatic. None of them argued against the motion. They offered careful language about proportionality and process. The kind of language you offer when you are not planning to vote a certain way, but want the record to show that you had concerns. Kelvor was called on. He stood. He had prepared remarks. He had spent 2 days on those remarks, trying to find the position that was honest and fair, and did not betray 61 years of trying to be a bridge between humans and the rest of the galaxy. He looked at Iris. She was watching him with something that was almost hope. He looked at the gallery. Dessa had set the datapad down on her knee and was looking at the ceiling with an expression that was not quite anything. The Thune Collective, he said, will vote with the motion. He sat down. He did not look at Iris again. The vote was called. Cell moved through the delegations in order. Each one gave their answer. There were no speeches now. Just words, clean and single, coming around the circle like stones dropping into water. With the motion. With the motion. With the motion. 17 delegations, 17 answers, 17 the same. Iris sat very still. A conclave clerk stood at the central floor and read the formal declaration. It was 3 paragraphs of legal language, the kind of language built over centuries to be precise and cold and unambiguous. Kelvor had heard similar language before. He had never heard it applied like this. The last sentence read, "The Galactic Conclave finds no objection to whatever remedy humanity deems proportionate." The word proportionate sat in the room. Iris understood it then. Kelvor watched her understand it. He watched the shape of her composure change in a very small way. Something around the eyes, something in the line of her shoulders. She had come here expecting to argue the definition of a line she had crossed. She was leaving a room in which no one had handed her a definition at all. She opened her mouth. In the gallery, Dessa filled in 7 across. She did not look up. She did not turn toward the central floor. She completed the answer, tapped the pen against the pad once, folded the crossword neatly, and tucked it into the breast pocket of her jacket. She stood. She buttoned the jacket, 1 button at a time. "That's that, then," she said. Her voice was quiet. It was not directed at anyone. It may have been directed at the room. It may have been directed at someone who was not in the room and had not been in any room for 14 years. She walked out. Nobody moved for a moment. Not the gallery, not the delegations, not Iris. Then the room began to stir and the voices started up, and the session moved into its formal close. But Kelvor sat still at the Thune Collective's desk and looked at the door through which Dessa had gone, and thought about the crossword puzzle in ink, and what it meant to know your answers before you sat down. He thought about the word proportionate. He thought about no one defining it. He had spent 200 years in rooms where people fought over definitions, where the argument was always about where the line was and who got to draw it. He had been good at that work. He had believed in that work. He looked at the empty doorway. He thought, she didn't come here for the vote. The vote was settled before she walked in. She came here because there was a room where this was being spoken aloud, formally, in language that would go into the record, and she wanted to be in it. She came here because she needed the record to know she was present. He understood that. He was not sure he was meant to. Dessa kept a handwritten list. It was on a single sheet of paper, folded twice, kept in the same breast pocket as the crossword puzzle. The paper was plain. No header, no title. Just a column of items in small, precise handwriting, the kind you develop when you have filled a lot of forms by hand and learned to fit information into small spaces. She crossed things off with a single horizontal line, not a scribble, not a scratch, a clean line drawn with a ruler. The list had 31 items when she started. The Valhari's First Fleet engaged the human advance line in the second month. Their commanders had studied human warfare carefully. They were not unprepared. They had reviewed 300 years of human military history, the great chaotic charges, the desperate last stands, the battles turned by fury and noise, and the strange human tendency to throw themselves at problems that should not be survivable. They had built a strategy around all of it. They expected an enemy driven by rage, a fleet that would come in hard and loud and make mistakes born from wanting to see the destruction with their own eyes. The human fleet came in quiet. No communications, no declarations, no signals of any kind. Just ships moving in precise formation, executing maneuvers in silence, hitting targets in an order that had clearly been worked out well in advance and was now simply being carried out. The Valhari's First Fleet was gone in 9 hours. The after-action reports described it, Kelvor was told, as almost administrative. The way a person empties a room, not out of anger at the room, but because the room needs to be empty, and there is a method for that, and the method is being followed. In the 5th month, Kelvor sent a private message to Dessa. The Valhari had reached out through 3 separate back channels. They were asking about negotiation, about terms, about what combination of concessions and apologies and political restructuring might constitute an acceptable response. They had a new minister heading their diplomatic corps. The previous one had been removed after the broadcast about grief exhausting itself. The new one was more careful. Kelvor typed the message carefully. He explained the request. He kept it neutral. He was asking, not advocating. He made that clear. The reply came back in 4 minutes. 1 word. No. Not with conditions attached. Not no unless. Just no, the same way you say no to something that has already been decided, and the asking is a formality. You are being courteous enough to answer at all. Kelvor sat with that word for a long time. He had been a diplomat for 2 centuries. He had watched species pull back from the edge of annihilation because someone sent the right message at the right moment. He had believed, deeply, in the power of the moment when both sides finally got tired of paying the cost. He had built his career on that belief. He had been right about it more times than he could count. He was not right about it now. The door had not been closed. There was no door. The frame had been taken out. The wall behind it. Dessa had not left a surface for a door to be rehung on. He understood that now with a clarity that sat in him like swallowed glass, sharp and still. In the 8th month, a Valhari cultural historian named Orvash broadcast a plea to the Galactic Conclave. She appeared on the network looking worn and honest, which Kelvor respected. She said, "You are watching a genocide. Call it what it is. Call it that, and respond accordingly." She was not wrong to say it. Kelvor turned the word over in his mind many times. He was the one who had to respond on behalf of the conclave, and he knew that every species in the galaxy would read whatever he said and measure it against what they knew and what they had chosen. He sat with the response for 3 days. He thought about the 47-page Valhari statement that used the word necessary. He thought about the map and the 3 highlighted systems and the underground shelters that had been targeted because someone had studied the colony's layout. He thought about Dessa's single-word reply to the question about negotiation. He thought about Yara, the daughter who had not lived to be 28, and who had nothing to do with this and everything to do with this, and how that was simply true and could not be fixed by any language he had. He wrote a response that was careful and diplomatic and legally correct. It cost him more than he expected. In the 11th month, the Valhari Supreme Commander requested direct communication with Fleet Admiral Morvain. Dessa took the call from the briefing room on patience. She had the same coffee mug. Someone had brought it back. She held it the same way. The Supreme Commander appeared on screen. He was old, older than his file suggested. The last 11 months had done something to his face that years alone had not managed. He was a military man, like Dessa. He had the same kind of posture she had. They were, Kelvor had always thought, more similar than either of them would ever agree to. The Supreme Commander looked at her across the screen. He asked what it would take. What number? What territory? What acknowledgement? What ceremony of atonement? What form of words, spoken publicly, in front of whoever she needed to witness them? Dessa looked at him. She did not look at his medals, or his rank insignia, or the flag behind him. She looked at his face, the way you look at something you are seeing clearly, and without any particular feeling about what you are seeing. "There is no version of this where you win," she said. Her voice was the same voice she used to order coffee. The same voice she had used in that briefing room when she asked about the breeding worlds. Level and quiet and completely without heat. There was a version where you thought about what you were doing and you didn't do it. That version is gone. This is the version that exists now, and in this version there is no path to winning. You should stop spending your people to find one. The Supreme Commander did not speak for a long moment. She ended the call. The 31st item on the list was the last Valhari military installation. It went dark on a Tuesday. Dessa was in the briefing room. She had the report in front of her, and she read it through once, the way she read everything, completely and without skipping. She took the list from her breast pocket. She laid it on the table, and got the small ruler she kept in her jacket's inner pocket, and she drew a clean horizontal line through the last item. She looked at the list. 31 lines, drawn level and straight, one after the other. She folded the list back up. She put the ruler away. She looked at the mug on the table for a moment. Outside the ship, 14 systems had changed, and a civilization that had thought in decades and moved in great slow strategic arcs had been reduced to a scattered remnant that would spend the next century just trying to remember what it had been. They had planned across generations. They had calculated. They had used the word necessary. None of it had been what they thought it was. Dessa sat in the quiet room. She did not feel finished. She did not feel like she had arrived somewhere. She felt, mostly, the particular emptiness of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and has just set it down. And now their arms still have the shape of the weight, and they don't yet know what to do with hands that are empty. She submitted her resignation that evening, 1 paragraph, no ceremony requested. She took the mug with her when she left. The debates about the Valhari remnant copulation went on for 8 months. 17 species in a room, trying to decide what you do with 4% of a civilization. The Valhari survivors had no homeworld now. They had colony ships and stations and scattered groups on the edges of 3 different sectors. and they had the 47-page statement that had started all of this, which some of them still believed in, and some of them had begun to speak against in ways that were careful and frightened, and came too late. Kelvor sat in those debates. He contributed. He was still good at his work. He found language that helped and positions that held. He did what he had done for 2 centuries. Dessa was not in the debates. She was not anywhere official. She had left the fleet the morning after the last installation went dark, and she had gone, as far as Kelvor could determine, to Kepler Colony. A resettlement officer who had seen her walking through the old school district. He took a ship out 3 weeks later. Kepler Colony was rebuilding. That was the word people used, rebuilding. It was the right word in one sense. There was new construction, new roads poured over old rubble, buildings going up where buildings had been taken down. Children were in the new schools. The medical center had reopened. The colony had grown, in fact, since the war. People had come in from other stations, drawn by something Kelvor did not entirely understand. A need to be somewhere that had been through the worst and was still standing. Humans did that sometimes. They moved toward the damage. The old school district had not been rebuilt. It had been cleared and flattened and marked. Stone markers where the walls had been. Small plaques with names on them. Paths that people could walk through quietly. Someone had planted low grass between the markers, the kind that grew soft and close to the ground. Someone had put benches at intervals. It was the kind of place that did its work through silence and open sky. Kelvor found Dessa on the far eastern path. She was walking slowly, hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the markers the way a person looks at things they have already looked at many times, but come back to anyway. She did not look surprised to see him. She looked, if anything, as though she had been expecting someone to show up eventually, and had simply been waiting to see who it would be. She nodded at him. He fell into step beside her. The path was wide enough for 2. The grass was very green. Somewhere at the edge of the memorial, a group of children were playing. Not in the memorial, but near it. The way children play near the edges of serious adult spaces, and don't fully come in. Their voices carried, but not loudly. It was a soft sound. A background sound. They walked. Kelvor did not speak. He had learned that from years of being near her. That she did not want management. She did not want someone to ease the space or fill it, or make it easier to be inside. She wanted someone to stand in it with her, the way you stand in bad weather with a person you trust. Not to fix the weather, just to be in it together. They came to the far end of the path. There was a shoe, a child's shoe, sitting at the base of one of the stone markers. Small, one of the bright-colored kind that fastened with a wide strap. The color had faded. It had been through weather, through seasons. Someone had left it there and it had stayed. Nobody had moved it. It had become part of the place. Dessa stopped. She looked at the shoe. Kelvor stopped beside her and looked at it too. He did not know whose it had been. He did not know if anyone knew anymore. It was possible it was just a shoe that had been there since the first awful days, and had stayed because moving it would have felt like a decision no one was ready to make. Dessa's hands stayed in her pockets. The children at the edge of the memorial were laughing about something. One of them, a small voice, high and clear, said something that made the others laugh louder for a moment, and then go quiet. Her name was Yara, Dessa said. Her voice was level, quiet, the same voice she used for everything. Kelvor did not ask whose. He already knew. He had always known. He stood very still. She would have been 28. That was all. No, this reminded me. No, that's why I did what I did. No reaching back into the long chain of things and pulling the thread through for someone to follow. Just the name and the age that would have been. Offered to the open air above a faded child's shoe. in a place that had learned to hold its grief low to the ground, like the soft grass between the markers. Kelvor stood beside her and breathed. He thought about what the Velhari minister had said, 11 months into the war, on the broadcast. That grief exhausts itself. That it peaks and burns and leaves quiet, and in the quiet, people negotiate. He thought about what Dessa had said to the Supreme Commander. There is no version of this where you win. He thought about those two things, and the space between them. The enormous, uncrossable space between a species that had treated grief like a weather system and a woman who had been standing in the same weather for 14 years and was still standing and had never once called it weather. They turned away from the shoe after a while and walked back up the path. Kelvor's memoir of the Velhari conflict took 3 years to write. This was longer than he had expected. He was not slow. He had written histories before, 4 of them, covering conflicts and treaties and the large, slow movements of civilizations. He knew how to put a thing in its frame and hold it there. He could not find the frame for this one. He wrote 17 drafts of the opening chapter. Every version had phrases he thought were right, until he read them again the next morning and found them inadequate. Unprecedented coalition, violation of civilized norms, asymmetric response doctrine, collective deterrence in action. The phrases were accurate. They were the kind of language that belongs in histories. They held the shape of the thing without touching the inside of it at all. He deleted them all. He wrote about the session in the briefing room, the mug held in both hands, the single syllable, He tried to explain it, and found that explaining it destroyed it, the same way explaining a joke tells you what the joke means without making you laugh. He wrote about the crossword puzzle in ink. He wrote about the word proportionate, and the room going very quiet, and Iris opening her mouth as the gallery emptied. He wrote about a child's shoe at the base of a stone marker, and a name given to the air. He wrote about walking beside a woman who did not cry. Not on that day, not in any of the small moments he had witnessed across 61 years. And understanding, finally, that the absence of tears was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of something else entirely. Something he did not have a word for in any of the 6 languages he spoke fluently. He sat with his drafts for a long time. The final version, the one he published, the one that was read in conclave halls and taught in xenoanthropology programs for the next 2 centuries, contained one paragraph that he wrote in a single sitting at 3 in the morning, on the 5th day of his final revision, after all 17 failed attempts had finally cleared the way. It read, "The Velhari made a single strategic error. They understood human grief as a variable, something that rises, depletes, and exhausts itself into negotiation. They believed that given enough time, humans would subtract their children from the equation and return to the table. They did not understand that for humans, the children are the table. There is nothing beneath. There is no floor below that floor. What we witnessed was not revenge. It was not even war in the way we use that word. It was a species being. For 14 months, without ceremony or explanation, entirely and quietly themselves. That is why we voted unanimously. That is why, if it comes to it, we will vote unanimously again." He published it. He did not send a copy to Dessa. She was not the kind of person who needed to read about herself to know what had happened. He poured himself a small glass of the grain liquor she had given him years ago, what was left of it now, and he sat at the window and looked at the stars and thought about a name given to the open air. Yara, 28 years old, the age she would have been. A table with no floor below it. He sat there for a long time, and the stars were still, and somewhere very far away, on a colony that was green and growing, and loud with the voices of children. The soft grass grew low between the markers, and the shoe stayed where it was.